Right, welcome back everybody for our second video in an 8-part series on the Charity Investment Governance Principles. These are a set of principles that have been put together by charities, led by a steering group consisting of the Charity Finance Group, NCVO, WCVA, ACF and the Charities Responsible Investment Network. And the project was funded by a group of philanthropic foundations, so thank you for that. The principles really focus on the practice in England and Wales and regulatory requirements there, although hopefully they'll be useful to those further afield as well. So today we're going to be exploring the principles in a bit more detail, and if you missed the introduction video, then please go back to broadstone.co.uk and you can find the link and subscribe for notifications when the next ones are released. So Gail, first of the principles. This principle, I would say, is arguably the most important, and it focuses on the purpose of investments. So given that the board has that responsibility on investment decisions, I assume it's fairly important to ensure that this principle, it really highlights how important it is for the board to have that shared understanding and why the charity is making investments and how those investments are going to further a charity's purpose. So it's just be really nice to hear about how you think that this can be embedded into board process and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with this principle, it really sort of sits across all of the other principles. It really is the kind of grounding point as to why does the charity hold investments? How do they further the charity's purposes? So what we look at in this principle, and you'll see the words all trustees being used, and we mentioned in one of the earlier videos, sometimes it says all trustees, and sometimes we make it clear where it might be a smaller group of trustees or some staff or committee members if you have a finance and investment committee who are taking this forward. But definitely in this principle, it's about all trustees having a shared understanding of what the charity's purposes are, what its mission and values and so on is, and also how investments are a tool to deliver those purposes and further those purposes. Now, obviously, for a lot of charities, they're holding investments because those are reserves to, help with sustainability of the charity. They might be funds that are designated towards a particular project, or it might be that they have an endowment and, they have more flexibility around spending of that money. So it's really understanding about why is the charity holding those investments and how is holding those investments helping to further the charity's purposes. This principle also goes into the legal responsibilities, the investment powers that trustees have on behalf of their charity. It talks about restrictions, so requirements that might be in the charity's governing document or because of the structure that the charity has, what those restrictions might be on making investments. And it also talks a little bit about understanding when monies might be needed and choosing the right investment approach, though obviously that's gone into much more detail in some of the later principles. And then it talks a little bit about time horizon and when charities might want to have an ultra long-term time horizon, or they might want to choose a specific time horizon to operate within.
Yeah, and I guess it's all of those different points that pull together within this particular principle. So why was it so important to highlight this point?
I think that it's really understanding that it's the responsibility of all trustees, and that actually just saying, well, we just hold investments, we've always had investments and so on, and not understanding. And particularly, I think for endowed charities, this is a very live topic, but also for all charities that have large investment portfolios, really understanding what their investment portfolio is doing for you. And also, obviously, for some charities, there's lots of opportunities to further the purposes beyond financial returns. So the Principles website has a big section on responsible impact and social investment. I say a big section, obviously, it's a huge topic, so it also has lots of ways you can refer to resources and other groups that are working in those areas. But it's really understanding what are all the different ways you can further the charity's purposes and how are the investments helping with that.
And I guess this kind of embeds, doesn't it, into all of the rest of the principles fundamentally once you get there. So if this is a really critical one to get right to help ensure all of the other principles sort of flow naturally from it, can you just talk maybe through some of the key implementation points here?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, the first point's really about understanding why the charity holds investments. And a lot of that might just be about discussions among the trustee board. For some charities, it'll be really straightforward. They'll say, we're holding these as reserves. We understand what length of time we need to hold them for, we understand what quantity we need to have, and so on. And for other charities, those might be really complicated discussions about, well, we have an endowment and how long do we want to exist in perpetuity? Do we have a time horizon, and so on? It also goes into the legal and practical considerations and helps trustees, and again, all trustees, understand that they are responsible for the investments. Obviously, a lot can be delegated. I don't want anyone to get terrified that they all need to learn everything about investments. That's absolutely not the case. But just understanding what are some of the legal obligations that trustees need to meet. And I think it's really helpful when new trustees start, you can point them towards the principles, point them towards this first principle so they understand what the investments are there for. And then the final one in this section is around time horizon and accumulating funds. And as I said, for some charities, it'll be really clear. And for other charities, they might not have thought about what time horizon they're operating in. They might just have assumed they're here to exist in perpetuity. And so again, it's charities really exploring that.
Yeah, and I guess that all sort of centres around discussion and having everybody at the board being able to give their views on their thoughts for the purpose. So maybe it's worth bringing out potentially a case study of some successes or pitfalls that are worth thinking about for those looking to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things, as we mentioned, is that all of the principles as you go through have lots of examples and explainers. They've got these lovely drop downs that work beautifully on a website where you can really dig in. If you go, oh, I don't quite understand how I would apply this in my charity's context, or I don't know what they were actually wanting me to do, you can hopefully open up that explainer. And I should mention at this point as well, we do have a very big provide feedback button. So if the explainer is not giving you everything you need, you hit that button and let us know. We will be running a phase 2 of the project to expand on some of those examples and explainers. So we'd love to get feedback. But yeah, to bring some specific points out, say on the legal and regulatory piece, obviously the principles can only kind of cover those at a high level. And so we've recommended sources of training, and that might be from the Association of Charitable Foundations or the Charity Finance Group or NCVO and other charity membership bodies, or it might be from law firms who quite often offer free advice for trustees and so on. And so it's taking advantage of some of that training so that trustees can understand what's required. We do also reference throughout the principles CC14, which is obviously the main Charity Commission guidance on investments, but we also reference other governance documents like CC36, which talks about a charity's governing document. So we're hopefully giving you some pointers. In terms of actual charity case studies, when we come to the time horizon question, we've got a lovely example in there from Macmillan and how they think about their reserves in terms of liquidity and ensuring the organisation has enough liquidity to operate in the way it wants to in terms of its sustainability. And we also talk about endowed foundations, so community foundations that might be looking to grow their endowment, or other foundations that are reviewing perpetuity and saying, look, we really need to be intentional about whether we want to exist in perpetuity. And it's that intentionality piece as well that's explored throughout the principles.
I mean, as a trustee for several different charities, I think I've, fundamentally got a good understanding of the purpose, but ultimately it's not actually just about that one person taking the responsibility. And I guess one of the focuses that I saw coming out of this principle was about the shared responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think, as I said, we want to be really clear about where it's all trustees, where you might want a smaller group looking at something, but also just really emphasising to trustees not to be scared of investments, because what we often see happening is that a charity will say, and you speak to charity trustees and they say, oh, I don't do the investments, so and so over there, they know all about investments, they do it all for us. And so it's really saying to trustees, no, there's certain things that all trustees ought to be aware of, and just have a little check that that is all happening as they believe it is as part of their delegation framework and so on. And we'll come on and talk a bit more about delegation frameworks in one of the later videos.
Amazing. Okay, I think we can wrap it up there for video number 2 of the series. This is going to be an 8-part series. We've really covered off some important parts of this principle, but next we're going to be focusing on principle number 2, which is leadership. And we're going to have a look at the key focus on delegation, looking at strategic approach and ensuring suitable governance structure. So don't forget to go to broadstone.co.uk so that you can follow the channel, I guess that's what we're calling it, channel, and then you can learn from listening to this information, which is the way I learn best.